I want to tell you something that most people who cover wars never tell you. There is a sound that happens in a military operations center in the minutes before a major strike is launched. Not an alarm, not a countdown. It is actually the opposite of noise. It is the sound of people who know exactly what is about to happen, going completely, deliberately, professionally quiet. I covered the Gulf War from a forward base in Saudi Arabia in 1991. I was 26 years old, and I heard that silence for the first time in the hours before the air campaign began. It is a silence that has a physical weight to it, a silence that tells you, without a single word being spoken, that the world is about to divide into a before and an after. On the night of February 27, 2026, that silence fell again. Over MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, where U.S. Central Command operates. Over Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, where the 59th Bomb Wing was already preparing aircraft that most of the world would not know were airborne until they had already finished their mission. Over Diego Garcia, the remote British Indian Ocean atoll that has served as America's unsinkable aircraft carrier in every major Middle East conflict for 30 years. And at 2 in the morning Eastern Standard Time, President Donald Trump posted an 8-minute video on Truth Social. No press conference, no address to Congress, no warning to allies beyond a handful of lawmakers briefed minutes before. Just a video. And in that video, he told the world that everything was already over. Because it was. What you are about to understand is not just the story of a military operation. It is the story of how 72 hours, just 72 hours, dismantled 47 years of Iranian military power. Power that Tehran had built methodically, expensively, and with absolute conviction that it could never be taken away in a single strike. Iran was wrong. And the instrument of that error was a bomber that has been flying since 1952, older than most of the generals who ordered the strike, but carrying a weapon so new, so precise, and so devastatingly powerful that the underground bunkers Iran spent billions of dollars constructing specifically to survive an American attack ceased to exist as functioning facilities in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. The B-52 Stratofortress. Let me tell you what that aircraft actually is, because the name appears in news headlines so frequently that people have stopped hearing it. The B-52 is not just a bomber, it is a flying statement about the nature of American military power, that the United States can project decisive, strategic force to any point on Earth from bases on American soil without asking permission from any intermediate country, without depending on regional alliances that could fracture under political pressure, and with a payload capacity that no other aircraft in the history of warfare has matched. During the first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury alone, B-52s struck Iranian ballistic missile sites and command and control posts across the country. Not one post, not a handful, a systematic, pre-planned elimination of the entire architecture of Iran's ability to coordinate, command, and launch the missiles that Tehran had spent 20 years and an estimated $40 billion building as its primary deterrent against exactly this kind of attack. But the B-52s were not the most devastating part of what happened on the night of February 28th. They were the follow-through. The first punch was something Iran never saw coming. And to understand why Iran never saw coming, you need to understand what happened 9 months earlier, in June of 2025. On June 22, 2025, 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers departed Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri and flew east for 18 hours, refueling 3 times in mid-air in an operation called Midnight Hammer. They carried 14 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator bombs, each one weighing 30,000 pounds, each one designed specifically and exclusively to destroy targets buried deep underground. Targets like Fordo, Iran's most hardened nuclear enrichment facility, carved into the granite of a mountain near Qom, specifically because Iran's engineers calculated that no conventional weapon could penetrate that far below the surface. The GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator was being used in an operational conflict for the first time in history. It was designed for exactly one purpose, Fordo, and it worked. Satellite imagery taken after the strikes showed two clusters of apparent bomb entry points and gray-blue ash surrounding the Orient where the mountain had been ventilated from the inside out. Trump declared Iran's nuclear program obliterated. He warned Iran never to resume. He offered negotiations. He gave Iran 9 months to make a deal, to accept terms, to step back from the edge of the cliff it was standing on. Iran did not step back. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, said on February 25, 2026, just 3 days before the second wave of strikes began, that a deal was within reach, that diplomacy must prevail, that Iran had a crystal-clear position against nuclear weapons. And then, the Omani mediator briefed both sides that negotiations had reached a breakthrough, that Iran had agreed, in principle, to zero enriched uranium stockpile, that the deal was essentially done. And then, the bombs fell anyway. Because here is what the diplomatic cable traffic and the Truth Social posts in the Omani mediator's optimism did not tell you. While Iranian foreign ministers were meeting in Geneva, while Araghchi was posting on social media about Iran's peaceful nuclear intentions, the United States was undertaking its largest military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Carrier strike groups, bomber task forces, a submarine fleet repositioned under complete radio silence. The buildup was not hidden, it was visible on satellite imagery to anyone who cared to look. But Iran made a calculation, the same calculation that authoritarian governments have repeatedly made throughout history, from Saddam Hussein in 1990 to Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. They looked at American military power massing on their doorstep, and they decided that the Americans were bluffing, that the domestic politics, the international pressure, the economic consequences would stop the strike, that the last-minute diplomacy would hold, that the silence before the storm was just silence. It was not silence. At approximately 7 in the morning local time on February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel began conducting extensive strikes across a wide range of targets across Iran. The operation the United States named Epic Fury, the operation Israel named Roaring Lion. And the first target was not a missile site, it was not a nuclear facility. The first target was the compound of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, the man who had led the Islamic Republic for 35 years, the man who had outlasted 8 American presidents, the man who had built Iran's deterrence architecture around the belief that the United States would never, ever strike directly at the head of the Iranian state. The opening attack on February 28th targeted the compound of Leadership House, and Ali Khamenei was killed. Let that land for a moment. The supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the man who controlled the nuclear program, the missile forces, the Revolutionary Guard, the proxy network stretching from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq, was gone in the first hours of the first day. The entire command structure of the Iranian state decapitated before the sun had fully risen over Tehran. Put yourself in the position of an IRGC general receiving that news. Your supreme commander is dead. The compound where Iran's senior leadership was supposed to convene in a crisis is rubble. Your communications infrastructure, the hardened command nodes that were supposed to survive an American first strike, is being systematically destroyed by B-52s operating at altitudes your remaining air defense systems cannot reliably reach. Your Navy, in just the first days of Operation Epic Fury, U.S. forces sank or destroyed more than 30 Iranian ships, making Iran's Navy combat ineffective. 30 ships, including a drone carrier the size of a World War II aircraft carrier that was still burning as CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper spoke to reporters. The same Navy that Iran spent decades building to close the Strait of Hormuz, to hold the global economy hostage, to deter exactly this kind of attack, was being destroyed at the pier before it could even put to sea. and your ballistic missile forces, the 2,000 to 3,000 warheads that were supposed to be Iran's ultimate deterrent, the weapons that could hit Israel, hit American bases across the region, hit the Gulf states that had quietly allowed American aircraft to use their airspace, were being hunted by B-52s and F-35s that owned the sky over your country so completely that Tehran's missile and drone salvos declined by roughly 70 to 85% from the first day of strikes within a week, as launcher after launcher was found and destroyed before it could fire a second time. By March 5, 2026, Iran had already launched roughly 585 ballistic missiles and 1,522 drones in retaliatory strikes against Israel, American bases, and Gulf Arab states. Those numbers sound alarming until you understand what they mean. Iran fired the contents of warehouses it had spent decades filling in less than a week, not because the IRGC commanders chose to empty those warehouses.
Because they understood, with the clarity that only comes when your command structure is collapsing and your air defenses are failing and your supreme leader is dead, that if they did not use those missiles now, the American B-52s would find the launchers and destroy them on the ground. They were not executing a strategy, they were spending down an inventory they knew they could not protect. The saturation campaign that Iran's military planners had designed to overwhelm Western air defenses and demonstrate Iran's reach and resilience became instead the most expensive military garage sale in history. Iran was trading irreplaceable strategic assets for airbursts over the desert. And then, something happened that told every naval strategist on Earth that the United States had not merely conducted an air campaign, it had conducted a hunt. On March 4, 2026, a United States submarine struck and sank the Iris Dana, Iran's most modern Muj-class frigate, approximately 40 nautical miles off the southern coast of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka. Think about where that is on a map. Not the Persian Gulf, not the Arabian Sea, the Indian Ocean, nearly 3,000 miles from Iran. A ship that had participated in a multinational naval exercise with India just weeks before, that was sailing home, that had no reason to believe it was a target, was found by an American submarine that had been tracking it silently, patiently for days. Of its 180 crew members, only 32 survived to be rescued by Sri Lankan naval forces. The rest are gone. The message of that sinking was not tactical, it was strategic. There is no ocean on Earth where Iranian naval vessels are safe from American submarines. There is no distance that creates sanctuary. There is no darkness deep enough to hide in. The domestic consequences inside Iran are only now beginning to show their full dimensions. Remember that in December 2025 and January 2026, protests broke out across Iran that became the largest since the Islamic Revolution, with thousands killed by Iranian security forces. Those protests were about economic pain, about political repression, about a population that had watched its currency collapse, its nuclear program bombed, its regional influence dismantled, while the men who promised them greatness delivered isolation and ruin. Now those same people are watching their state broadcasters' headquarters be destroyed by Israeli airstrikes. In the early hours of March 3, 2026, the Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting Complex, the state broadcaster's headquarters in Tehran, was hit in a separate Israeli air operation. The voice of the regime silenced. The infrastructure of 47 years of Islamic Republic information control turned to rubble on a street in Tehran that millions of Iranian citizens pass every day. There is no way to hide that. There is no state television broadcast that can explain away a building that used to exist and no longer does. Trump's 8-minute video concluded with a direct message to the Iranian people: the hour of your freedom is at hand. Whether that promise proves to be true, whether what emerges from the ash of the Islamic Republic serves the Iranian people better than what came before, that is a question that history will take years to answer. Wars end. The destruction they cause does not end with the ceasefire. The rubble remains. The missing sailors remain missing. The families of the protesters killed in January remain without justice. The nuclear material that was at Isfahan before the strikes, approximately 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, whose exact location remains unknown, remains unaccounted for, somewhere inside a country that is now simultaneously at war, in political transition, and being struck daily by the most powerful air force in human history. 72 hours changed everything visible about Iran's military power. What remains invisible, what was moved before the strikes, what was buried deeper than any bomb has yet reached, what a regime facing annihilation might do with its last remaining leverage, those questions are not answered by B-52 strikes. Those questions are answered by the months and years that come after the silence returns. My grandfather used to say that the most dangerous moment in any fight is not when your opponent is strong, it is when he has nothing left to lose. Iran is not finished. The IRGC is not finished. The ideology that built 47 years of proxy wars across the Middle East does not evaporate because a supreme leader is dead and a navy is at the bottom of the ocean. What has ended is Iran's ability to project that ideology from a position of strength. What has ended is the assumption that American restraint was permanent, that the threat of escalation would always hold Washington back, that the nuclear shadow would always be Iran's protection. Operation Epic Fury burned that assumption to the ground in 72 hours, with the same bombs that burned Fordo and Natanz and the Leadership House complex, where a man who believed himself untouchable discovered at the end that no one is. So, tell us, do you believe 72 hours of B-52 strikes has fundamentally changed the Middle East, or has it only changed the surface while the roots of the conflict remain? Leave your assessment in the comments below. This channel covers the stories that the headlines cannot contain, with the depth, the context, and the human truth that a moment this large demands. If that brought you here today, subscribe, because the story of what comes after Operation Epic Fury is just beginning. Thank you for watching.